Wife's brutal cheating exposed, the shocking way I unleashed my revenge and reclaimed my life after her lies shattered everything. You won't believe what happened next. Okay, Reddit, I really need some advice, or maybe just a place to vent, because my world just imploded, and I don't even know what to call myself anymore. Throw away for obvious reasons, but this isn't some made-up crap. This is my life, raw and unfiltered. So, I'm 35, and my, now I guess, ex-wife, Sarah, is F34. We've been together for 12 years, married for 10. 10 years, guys. I thought she was it. My dream girl. We met in college, struggled through the early years, celebrated promotions, mourned losses, built a home. We had plans, you know. Kids, retirement, growing old together on a porch somewhere. Our relationship wasn't perfect, no one's is, but it felt solid. Unbreakable. We had our squabbles, mostly about her spending habits or her occasional snarky remarks that she'd always brush off as, just teasing, but I always thought it was surface-level stuff. Nothing that could ever crack the foundation we built. She was always the more demanding one, I guess you could say. High maintenance, a bit of a diva, but I found it charming. I loved catering to her, making her happy. I genuinely did. Looking back, the signs were probably there, subtle at first, like a slow drip that you don't notice until the ceiling caves in. She started working late more often, big project, babe, you know how it is. Her phone became an extension of her hand, always face down, always locked. She'd get annoyed if I even glanced at it. Sex. That dwindled to almost nothing. When I'd bring it up, she'd sigh, roll her eyes, and say she was stressed, or tired, or that I was being needy. I believed her. Every single time. Because why wouldn't I? She was Sarah. My Sarah. The woman I trusted more than anyone on this planet. God, I was such an idiot. A clueless, trusting fool. The real shitshow started about 3 months ago. She got a new manager at work, a guy named Mark. She'd mention him casually at first, mostly complaining about his demands, but then it shifted. She started talking about him like he was some kind of work guru. Mark says this, Mark thinks that. It grated on me a little, but again, I brushed it off. Just work talk. Then came the business trips. One weekend, then another one a month later. Each time, she'd be distant, a little cold when she got back, claiming she was exhausted. I bought it. I'm such a pathetic joke, aren't I? The turning point was so mundane, so utterly normal, it still makes my stomach churn when I think about it. I was working from home that day, nursing a nasty head cold. Sarah had gone to work, or so I thought. Around lunchtime, I realized I'd left my AirPods in her gym bag, the one she always took to work because she'd hit the gym after her long days. I figured I'd grab them, maybe order some takeout for her since she was working so hard. I drove to her office building, got to her floor, and her desk was empty. Her coworker, Janice, a sweet older lady, saw me. "Oh, Sarah's not in today, honey," she said, sounding confused. She took the day off. Said she had a doctor's appointment. My blood ran cold. Doctor's appointment? She hadn't mentioned a thing. Not a sniffle, not a complaint. My brain started whirring. The gym bag. She never forgot her gym bag if she was going to the gym. My AirPods. I just knew. A sickening dread washed over me, heavy and suffocating. It was like a physical blow. I mumbled some excuse to Janice and practically ran out of there, heart hammering against my ribs. I drove home, hands clenched on the steering wheel, a million worst-case scenarios playing out in my head. But none of them were quite as bad as the truth. When I pulled into our driveway, Sarah's car was there. Her car. She was home. She was home from her doctor's appointment, which turned out to be a lie, and her work for the day which was also a lie. My stomach lurched. I walked into the house, my own home, the place where I was supposed to feel safe, and it felt like a trap. The house was quiet. Too quiet. My ears were ringing with the sound of my own frantic pulse. I called out her name, Sarah. Are you home? No answer. I walked through the living room, the kitchen, nothing. Then I noticed the open bedroom door. Our bedroom. I pushed it open further, slowly, agonizingly. And that's when I saw it. There they were. Sarah. And Mark. Her boss. In our bed. Naked. They didn't even hear me at first, completely engrossed. She was laughing, that tinkling laugh I used to adore, the one she hadn't directed at me in months. He was whispering something in her ear, and she was giggling, running her fingers through his hair. It was a scene ripped straight from my worst nightmares, but a million times more vivid, more disgusting, more real. The air left my lungs. My vision tunneled. It was like watching a movie of my life, but I was the unsuspecting idiot, the cuckold. I swear, the blood drained from my face so fast I thought I was going to pass out right there. The pain was physical, a sharp, searing agony in my chest. All those late nights, all those business trips, all those excuses. It all clicked into place with horrifying clarity. My wife. My Sarah. In our bed. With him. Hey guys, quick pause from the intensity. If you're finding this story gripping, do me a huge favor and hit that subscribe button, and give the video a like. It really helps me out, and I've got a lot more to share. Back to the nightmare. I didn't scream. I didn't shout. My voice just froze. I must have made some kind of noise, though, because Sarah's eyes suddenly snapped open, and she saw me standing there. The look on her face, pure, unadulterated terror. Her jaw dropped. Mark, still oblivious, turned his head to see what she was staring at. His eyes widened, his face going slack. The silence in that room, filled only with my ragged breathing, was deafening. It stretched on forever, an eternity of pure, unadulterated hell. It felt like an eternity, but it was probably only a few seconds before Sarah finally found her voice. It was a strangled gasp. No. Mike. I can explain, she stammered, scrambling to cover herself with the sheet. Mark, the pathetic worm, just lay there, frozen, his eyes darting between me and Sarah, like a trapped animal. I don't think he even tried to move. Explain. I heard myself say, but it sounded alien, not like my own voice. It was hollow, cracked. Explain what, Sarah? Explain why my wife is naked in my bed with her boss. Explain all the lies. The late nights. The doctor's appointments. My voice started to rise with each word, the tremor in it barely controlled. Explain why you looked me in the eye and lied to me for months. For years. She started to cry, those fake, theatrical tears she always used when she wanted to manipulate me. It's not what you think, Mike. It was a mistake. A huge, terrible mistake. He coerced me. He threatened my job. She sobbed, pointing a trembling finger at Mark. The gall, the absolute audacity of her. Mark, who had finally started to pull on his pants, looked up, a flicker of outrage crossing his face. What? That's a lie. You came on to me, Sarah. You were practically throwing yourself at me for weeks. He blurted out, clearly not wanting to be thrown under the bus. And just like that, the entire disgusting facade crumbled before my eyes. They started to bicker, right there, in my bedroom, over who was more to blame. My wife, the woman I swore to spend my life with, and her scumbag boss, arguing like children about their sordid affair. It was beyond parody. It was a grotesque circus, and I was the humiliated audience. I didn't yell. I didn't hit anyone. I just stood there, watching them, feeling absolutely nothing but a cold, hard emptiness where my heart used to be. My chest felt hollowed out. The sadness was immense, crushing, but it was quickly overshadowed by a terrifying clarity. This wasn't just a mistake. This was a pattern of calculated deceit. This was brutal betrayal. The woman I loved, the life I had built, it was all a lie. All of it. I didn't say another word. Just turned and walked out of the bedroom, leaving them in their pathetic, half-dressed argument. I heard Sarah call my name, a desperate, tearful sound, but I ignored her. I walked into the living room, grabbed the car keys off the hook, and walked out the front door. I got into my car and just drove. Anywhere. Nowhere. I didn't care. The world outside looked the same, the houses, the trees, the familiar streets, but everything was fundamentally different. My vision was swimming, and a strange ringing filled my ears. I drove for hours, my mind a chaotic whirlwind of shock, disbelief, and a gut-wrenching pain that made me feel physically ill. The images kept replaying, Sarah and Mark, their faces, the way they looked in our bed. It was a loop of pure agony. Anger started to bubble up, hot and viscous, a burning rage that threatened to consume me. How could she? How could she do this to us? To me? Every sweet memory, every shared laugh, every promise felt tainted, poisoned. Was it all fake? Was I just a convenient fool for her to come home to after she'd gotten her kicks elsewhere? The humiliation was unbearable. I felt like a punchline, a cosmic joke. Then came the sadness, a wave so profound it nearly capsized me. 10 years. A decade of my life, my love, my loyalty, thrown away like trash. All the dreams we had, shattered. The future I envisioned, a gaping void. I found myself pulling over to the side of a deserted road, leaning my head against the steering wheel, and just weeping. Not soft tears, but racking, guttural sobs that tore through me. It was the sound of a broken man, a man whose entire world had just been obliterated. The grief was overwhelming, like a death. It was a death, the death of my marriage, the death of my trust, the death of who I thought Sarah was. And I was left picking through the wreckage of my own heart. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only an hour of gut-wrenching sobs, the crying stopped. Not because the pain was gone, but because I felt utterly depleted, hollowed out. A chilling calm settled over me, a strange, quiet resolve. The immediate, searing agony gave way to a cold, hard anger, and a startling clarity. My pity party was over. I drove to a friend's place, crashing on his couch without explaining much beyond, Sarah and I are having problems. He's a good guy, just gave me a beer and let me stare at the wall. The next morning, I woke up with a plan forming in my mind, precise and chilling. This wasn't just about ending the marriage, it was about ensuring she understood the depth of her betrayal, the brutality of it. She wanted brutal. She was going to get brutal. I called a lawyer first thing, a pit bull I knew through a colleague. Explained the situation in clipped, emotionless tones. His advice: gather evidence, change locks, and do not communicate with her directly unless necessary and documented. He talked about alimony, assets, division of property. My mind, however, was elsewhere. I went back to the house that afternoon, after ensuring Sarah was at her office, or Mark's bed, who knew. I packed a bag of essentials for myself and then, methodically, I went through our home. I took every single item that had sentimental value only to me, old photos of my family, a small carving my grandfather made, the watch my dad gave me. I emptied my personal accounts, transferring everything to a new, secret one. I disconnected her credit cards from joint accounts. Then, I called a locksmith and had all the locks changed. Every single one. By the time I was done, I felt like a phantom in my own home. And then, the piece de resistance. I went into her walk-in closet, the one overflowing with designer clothes and shoes she'd maxed out credit cards to buy. Everything I had bought her, every expensive gift, every piece of jewelry. I gathered it all. Not to destroy, not yet. I put it into boxes, labeled them clearly, and arranged for a courier to deliver them directly to her office the next day. The message would be clear: this is yours, paid for by a fool. The divorce papers would be served at the same time. The emotional impact would be instantaneous, public, and undeniable. She wasn't just losing a husband, she was losing her perceived status, her lavish lifestyle, and a very public slice of her dignity. And it was just the beginning. The next day felt like an out-of-body experience. I was numb, but with an underlying hum of vengeful satisfaction. I stayed at my friend's place, my phone silent, ignoring the barrage of texts and calls that started around midday. I knew exactly what they were about. The courier would have delivered the boxes and the divorce papers by then. I pictured her face, surrounded by her colleagues, opening those boxes filled with her expensive trinkets, followed by the legal documents. A public spectacle, just as I'd planned. She loved appearances, now she'd have one she'd never forget. Around evening, I finally picked up my phone. There were dozens of missed calls, mostly from Sarah, but a few from her sister and even her mom. I went straight to her messages. They started with outrage: "What the hell, Mike? Why are the locks changed?" Then progressed to desperate pleas: "Mike, please, this isn't fair. Let's talk. I made a mistake." Finally, they devolved into threats and insults: "You pathetic loser. You'll regret this. You're going to pay for this, you hear me?" I just scrolled through them, a detached observer. Not a single one mentioned remorse for her actions, only anger at my reaction. It solidified everything. She was truly a self-absorbed monster. The mistake she was referring to wasn't the betrayal, but getting caught. I sent one single, short reply to her: "Consider this our final conversation. All future communication will go through my attorney. Don't contact me again." Then I blocked her number. Blocked her family too. I felt a strange sense of liberation, like severing a toxic limb. The next few weeks were a blur of legal meetings, sorting out paperwork, and the slow, painful process of detaching myself from a decade of shared life. Every item in the house that had been ours felt tainted. I started selling things, donating things, whatever it took to cleanse the space. I moved back into the house, which felt foreign and empty without her presence, but also refreshingly free of her drama. Mark, her boss, surprisingly, faced consequences too. Turns out, some of his colleagues had witnessed Sarah's public meltdown when the boxes arrived. Coupled with the divorce papers being served at the office and her subsequent frantic, unprofessional behavior, an internal investigation was launched. Within a month, he was let go from his position, citing unprofessional conduct. A small victory, but a satisfying one. He deserved every bit of it for his part in destroying my life. And I knew, with a grim certainty, that this was far from over for Sarah. This was just the opening act. The following months were a weird mix of emotional whiplash. There were days I felt a profound sadness, almost crippling grief, missing the idea of what I thought we had. I'd catch myself reaching for her hand, or planning to tell her about something funny that happened, only to be hit with the cold, hard reality that she was gone. Those moments were brutal, twisting knives in my gut. But then, just as suddenly, a wave of pure, incandescent rage would wash over me. The memory of her and Mark, the lies, her pathetic excuses, it all fueled a fire that kept me moving forward. My lawyer was a godsend. He understood the need for a clean, decisive break, and he was relentless. Sarah, predictably, tried to fight everything. She claimed emotional distress, tried to spin narratives about me being controlling, about her needing an escape. It was all standard manipulative garbage. But I had the evidence, the timeline, the cold hard facts. Her initial refusal to settle turned into a desperate plea as my lawyer started digging into her finances, her secret credit cards, and her lavish spending that had been draining our joint accounts. The biggest blow to her came when the company, reeling from the Mark scandal, also decided to let her go. Restructuring, they called it. But I knew the truth. Her reputation was in tatters. Without her high-paying job, the lifestyle she was so used to, the one I had largely funded, was crumbling. She had to move out of our house, of course, and was forced to find a tiny, overpriced apartment. The contrast to the life she'd enjoyed was stark, and I found a bitter satisfaction in picturing her struggle. The divorce was finalized 6 months after I found them in our bed. It was messy, but ultimately, I came out of it better than I could have imagined. She got very little, barely enough to cover her debts. No alimony. Her cheating, and her financial mismanagement, ensured that. I kept the house, my investments, and my sanity, albeit a little scarred. The emotional impact, though, was the hardest part. I started therapy, something I never thought I'd do. It helped immensely to process the trauma, the betrayal, the erosion of trust. I learned that my anger was valid, my sadness was valid, but I couldn't let them define me. I had to rebuild, not just my life, but my understanding of myself. And it slowly began to dawn on me, this wasn't just about revenge. This was about survival. This was about reclaiming my self-worth from the ashes of her destruction. Life post-divorce was a strange blend of quiet introspection and determined rebuilding. The house, once a painful reminder, slowly transformed back into a home. I redecorated, bought new furniture, even painted a few rooms, erasing the last vestiges of Sarah's taste. It was therapeutic, like purging a sickness. My friends were incredible, checking in, inviting me out, and just listening without judgment. My family, once I finally told them the full story, were supportive and furious on my behalf. Their anger was a balm, confirming that I wasn't crazy for feeling what I felt. I continued therapy, delving deep into my own patterns, my own complicity in allowing myself to be manipulated for so long. I realized I had overlooked so many red flags, not because I was stupid, but because I was so invested in the idea of our perfect life, of her being the one. I had let my desire for her happiness overshadow my own self-respect. That was a hard pill to swallow, but an essential one for my healing. Dating? That felt like an alien concept. The thought of trusting someone again, of opening myself up to that kind of vulnerability, was terrifying. But my therapist encouraged me to take small steps, to reconnect with people, not necessarily romantically, but socially. I joined a hiking group, started taking cooking classes. Just putting myself out there, proving to myself that there was life beyond the crater Sarah had left in my heart. The anger, while still present, started to morph. It wasn't the burning, destructive rage anymore. It was more like a controlled flame, a reminder of the lesson learned. I didn't want to dedicate my life to hating her. That would mean she still had power over me. I wanted to dedicate my life to me, to building something stronger, more authentic, something she could never touch. One day, completely out of the blue, I got a text from an unknown number. It was Sarah. She was reaching out, hoping I was doing okay, and missing our old life. It was a fishing expedition, I knew. She probably needed something or realized what she lost. I stared at the message for a long time, my thumb hovering over the reply button. But then I smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile. I blocked the number without a second thought. Her chapter was closed. My story was just beginning. About a year after the divorce was finalized, something unexpected happened that really brought a strange sense of closure, almost like a final, brutal chapter for her, though not directly orchestrated by me. I was at a coffee shop, catching up on some work, when I overheard a conversation at the next table. Two women were gossiping about someone they used to work with, Sarah Miller. My ears perked up, obviously. They were talking about how she'd gotten fired from her last 2 jobs, both for minor infractions, but really because her reputation had preceded her. Apparently, her bitterness and drama had made her unhireable in their industry. Then one of them dropped a bombshell, and you hear she's dating Mark again. The same Mark she cheated with? Apparently, he's lost his job too, and they're both living in some tiny studio apartment, barely making ends meet. My coffee cup almost slipped from my hand. Mark. Again. Living together. Barely making ends meet. The image flashed in my mind, the luxurious life she demanded, the designer clothes, the expensive trips, all gone. Replaced by a tiny studio and a man who was also a total failure. The poetic justice of it was almost too perfect. I felt nothing. No triumph, no burning desire to gloat. Just a calm, almost serene understanding. The universe, or karma, or whatever you want to call it, had handled the rest. My direct revenge had been swift and devastating, cutting her off from her primary source of financial support and publicly humiliating her. But the slow, grinding consequence of her own character, her inability to take responsibility, her continuous bad choices, that was a punishment I couldn't have even dreamed up. It was a profound moment of letting go. She was no longer my problem, no longer a source of pain or anger. She was just Sarah. A woman who made her bed and was now forced to lie in it, quite literally, with the very man who helped tear our life apart. It was brutal, yes, but it was self-inflicted. And I realized that true revenge isn't about actively ruining someone else's life, it's about so thoroughly rebuilding your own that their existence, good or bad, becomes utterly irrelevant. It's about finding peace. And in that moment, I truly felt it. A deep, abiding peace. Alright, another quick break here. If you've been following along with my story and it's resonating with you, please consider hitting that subscribe button and liking the video. Your support means a lot, and it helps me feel like sharing this wasn't just for nothing. Thanks for being here, guys. The peace I found wasn't some sudden, magical fix, mind you. It was hard-won, built brick by painful brick. There were still days, even after all this, when the ghosts of the past would creep in. A certain song on the radio, a smell, seeing a couple that reminded me of us in happier times. Those moments would sting, a phantom ache in my chest. But the difference was, now I could acknowledge the pain without letting it consume me. I could feel the sadness, recognize it for what it was, a natural part of healing from such a deep wound, and then let it pass. I kept up with therapy, finding immense value in continuing to unpack my own emotional baggage. It wasn't just about Sarah anymore, it was about understanding my patterns, learning how to set healthier boundaries, and recognizing what I truly deserved in a partner and in life. It was about self-love, something I realized I had neglected for a very long time, always prioritizing Sarah's needs and desires over my own. Professionally, I thrived. The focus and drive that came from rebuilding my life translated into my career. I took on new challenges, got a promotion, and found a renewed sense of purpose in my work. The financial security I had established, initially out of necessity, now gave me a profound sense of independence and freedom. No more worrying about someone else's reckless spending, no more living in a constant state of low-level anxiety about money. The house, once a source of bitter memories, truly became my sanctuary. I filled it with things that brought me joy, hosted friends, and even adopted a rescue dog, a goofy, loyal companion who filled the silence with happy snores and wagging tails. It was a life I was actively building for myself, by myself, reflecting my values and desires. A life that was authentic and true. And then, slowly, tentatively, I started dipping my toes back into the dating pool. It was terrifying, of course. The trust issues were immense. Every new person felt like a potential landmine. But I learned to take it slow, to be upfront about my past without dwelling on it, and most importantly, to listen to my gut. To value emotional honesty and genuine connection above all else. I wasn't looking for a replacement for Sarah, I was looking for someone entirely new, someone who would complement the person I had become, not complete a broken version of myself. It was a journey, and I knew it would be a long one, but for the first time in years, I felt hopeful. Truly, genuinely hopeful. The dating scene was definitely an adventure, and not always a good one. There were a few false starts, some awkward first dates, and a couple of people who just felt off. My radar for red flags was hypersensitive, which, while sometimes exhausting, was also a good thing. I wasn't going to make the same mistakes again. I realized I was looking for substance, for kindness, for someone who could genuinely communicate and be vulnerable, things that were utterly absent in my previous relationship. Then, about 2 years after the divorce, I met Emily. It was at one of those cooking classes I'd joined. She was quiet, witty, and had a smile that crinkled her eyes. We started talking about recipes, then about life, and before I knew it, hours had passed. There was an ease with her, a genuine comfort that I hadn't felt in a very, very long time. I was upfront with her about my past, not in a woe is me way, but in an honest, this is where I've been way. She listened, empathetic and understanding, without judgment. And she shared her own stories, her own past heartbreaks, which made me feel less alone. We took things incredibly slow, building a friendship first, allowing trust to blossom organically. There was no pressure, no demands, just a quiet, growing connection. What struck me most about Emily was her integrity. She was honest to a fault, even when it was difficult. She valued transparency, and she didn't play games. These were qualities I now knew were non-negotiable for me. She was also fiercely independent, confident in her own skin, and encouraged me to continue pursuing my own passions, just as I encouraged hers. It was a partnership, a true team, something I'd only ever dreamed of before. With Emily, I learned that true love isn't about grand gestures or dramatic declarations. It's about the quiet moments, the shared laughter over silly things, the unwavering support, and the deep, profound respect for each other's individuality. It's about feeling safe, truly safe, to be completely yourself. It's not a fairy tale, but it's real. And after all the brutal honesty I'd faced, this realness was exactly what I needed. Sarah's betrayal had nearly broken me, but it also cracked me open, allowing me to finally see what true connection actually felt like. And for that, in a weird, twisted way, I was almost grateful. Almost. Looking back on everything, the whole brutal journey, it's hard to encapsulate it all. The initial shock, the soul-crushing pain, the volcanic rage, and then the slow, arduous climb back to sanity and peace. It was a transformation I never asked for, but one that ultimately reshaped me in profound ways. I'm not the same naive, trusting guy who walked into that bedroom 3 years ago. That guy is gone, replaced by someone tougher, wiser, and infinitely more discerning. One of the biggest lessons, and it's a cliché for a reason, is to trust your gut. Those subtle whispers, those nagging doubts you try to rationalize away, they are often your subconscious picking up on things your conscious mind is too scared to confront. If something feels off, investigate. Don't let fear of what you might find keep you from seeking the truth. Ignorance is definitely not bliss when it comes to betrayal. Another huge takeaway, don't tolerate disrespect. Sarah's bitchy comments, her eye rolls, her dismissiveness, I let it slide because I loved her, because I thought it was just her personality. But those small cuts eventually bleed out. Self-respect is paramount. If someone doesn't value you enough to be honest, respectful, and loyal, they don't deserve a place in your life, no matter how long you've been together. The revenge, as brutal as it was, wasn't the key to my healing. It was a necessary step for me to reclaim my power and draw a hard line, to say, no more. But the real healing came from within, from therapy, from rebuilding my life on my terms, from rediscovering myself, and from learning to love and trust again, starting with myself. Don't let someone else's actions define your worth or your future. They may break your heart, but they don't get to break your spirit unless you let them. Okay, last quick moment here. If you've stuck with me through this entire brutal and raw story, thank you. Seriously. It means a lot to know I'm not shouting into the void. If you've been moved, enraged, or found any ounce of solidarity in my experience, please, do hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. Your support truly helps. And remember, you're not alone. Finally, for anyone out there going through something similar, it will get better. It won't be easy, and there will be days you feel like you're drowning. But you are stronger than you think. Lean on your support system. Seek professional help. And slowly, painstakingly, build a new life for yourself. A life where you are respected, cherished, and genuinely happy. You deserve it. I never thought I'd say this, but in the wreckage of my old life, I found the blueprint for a better one. And so can you. The journey of self-discovery after such a devastating blow was far more complex than just getting over Sarah. It was about deconstructing the person I had become within that relationship. I realized I had molded myself to fit her expectations, constantly striving for her approval, minimizing my own needs to accommodate her whims. It was a subtle erosion of self that I hadn't even recognized until the entire facade crashed down. Therapy became a crucial space for me to excavate these buried parts of myself. We talked about my childhood, my family dynamics, and how those early experiences might have made me susceptible to someone like Sarah, someone who took advantage of my accommodating nature. It was uncomfortable, painful work, peeling back layers of denial and repressed emotions, but it was absolutely essential. I learned about codependency, about people-pleasing, and how these tendencies, while born from a desire to connect and be loved, could ultimately lead to self-destruction when paired with a manipulative partner. I started to actively challenge my old thought patterns. Instead of asking, what would make Sarah happy? I began to ask, what do I want? What do I need? What feels right for me? It felt selfish at first, almost alien. But with practice, it became empowering. I started setting boundaries, not just in new relationships, but with friends, family, and even at work. It was liberating to finally assert my own needs and preferences without guilt. This process also led to a significant shift in my perspective on my future. Before, my future was always intertwined with Sarah's, a shared path dictated largely by her desires. Now, it was a blank canvas, and I held the brush. I started exploring hobbies I'd put on hold, like photography, and even considering a career pivot I'd always dreamed about but dismissed as impractical for us. The world suddenly felt wide open, full of possibilities rather than limitations. This wasn't just about healing from infidelity, it was about evolving into a more authentic, self-aware version of myself. The betrayal had been brutal, yes, but it had also been a catalyst. A painful, traumatic catalyst, but a catalyst nonetheless, that forced me to confront uncomfortable truths and ultimately build a life rooted in genuine self-respect and integrity. It was a strange, unexpected gift from a nightmare. One of the hardest parts of this entire ordeal was facing the judgment of others, even if it was just in my own head. For a while, I carried a lot of shame. Shame that I had been cheated on, shame that I had been so blind, so stupid, so trusting. I worried people would see me as weak, as a cuckold, as someone who deserved it for being so oblivious. This internal narrative was just as damaging as Sarah's betrayal itself. My therapist helped me dismantle this. She reminded me that shame belongs to the betrayer, not the betrayed. I was the victim of someone else's cruel choices, not a perpetrator. It wasn't my fault that Sarah lacked integrity. My trusting nature, once seen as a weakness by my internal critic, was actually a strength, a sign of an open heart, something I needed to protect, not abandon entirely. The shift in perspective was gradual, but powerful. I stopped hiding the truth, stopped trying to sugarcoat things for people. When questions arose, I told my story plainly, without dramatics or self-pity, just facts. And what I found was not judgment, but overwhelming empathy and support. Friends and family rallied around me, expressing outrage on my behalf. Even casual acquaintances offered words of comfort and validation. This outpouring of genuine care was instrumental in helping me shed the shame and replace it with a sense of quiet dignity. I also learned to forgive myself for my blindness. Hindsight is 20/20, and I realized I did the best I could with the information I had at the time. I was in love, and I believed in the person I thought Sarah was. It's not a crime to trust someone you love. It's a risk, yes, but one that comes from a place of good intent. This self-forgiveness was a critical step in truly moving forward. It freed me from the constant loop of what-ifs and should-haves. My revenge on Sarah had been external, a systematic dismantling of her comfortable life. But the true, internal revenge was far more profound. It was reclaiming my narrative, owning my story, and refusing to let her actions define who I was or how I saw myself. It was about standing tall, head held high, knowing that I had navigated the depths of hell and emerged, not unscathed, but undeniably stronger. This profound sense of self-acceptance and quiet strength was the most potent, most lasting form of vindication I could ever achieve.